Welcome to DeFi by Design, where we talk all things blockchain and cryptocurrency while striving to educate, empower, and enrich.
It's your boy Andy, and welcome back to the DeFi Slate YouTube channel. Smash the like button on this video, that really helps us out, and sit back and enjoy the content. Thank you very much. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to episode 58 of the DeFi by Design podcast. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you all. Coming out, we got a little bit of year-end tax loss harvesting happening. The whales are trying to FUD your bags right now. Take it easy, guys. Enjoy the family time. Turn that leverage down and learn some about what's going on in DeFi in 2022, and that's what we're doing today. Today we're talking to an OG project from 2017, back when Rob and I used to be freshman year in university trading on Bittrex. This project was there, it was on our radar, it was pumping it. And they've kept building and they've kept going, and now are pushing hard into the DeFi space. This project is Syscoin. We're joined today with Bradley and Jag. Great to have you guys on. As always, here with Robbie as well. Robbie's posted up in Tennessee in a cabin vibes. I'm down here in Florida enjoying the sun, and we're excited to chat for a good hour, talk about blockchain, what Syscoin's building, DeFi in 2022, and all sorts of trends that are going on. So let's get started. What's going on, Rob?
Yeah, man. Well, happy holidays to everyone listening, and a happy new year. Super stoked to be talking to Syscoin. Like Andy said, they've been building and building and building pretty much since we got started. One of the OG projects out there that's been at the root of the fundamentals of blockchain. As kind of DeFi evolved and some of the different use cases evolved into applications, Syscoin has been at that fundamental layer all the way through. So I'm really excited to hear from Bradley and Jag. I guess to start on kind of the evolution of how Syscoin has really evolved over the course of the last few years, and with the emergence of some of these new applications, kind of how Syscoin has dealt with them, kind of seen what's out there, but continued to stay true to your mission. That's kind of open to whoever would like to take that, Bradley or Jag. But if you'd like to kind of walk us through, what is Syscoin doing, and how have you all evolved over the last few years?
Yeah, so my name is Bradley Stephenson. I'm a Syscoin Foundation Board Member. Very happy to be here and dive into Syscoin. So what attracted me to the project initially when I first really started looking into it in late 2016 was just the methodical approach to design, the maturity from a development standpoint. The developers, Jag in particular, seemed to really have his head on straight. He wasn't, there wasn't like there wasn't a push to rush things to market. Having a proper design that really accounts for where blockchain technology's at, what the challenges really were, and where Syscoin was at that present time, and sort of the direction that it needed to move towards, becoming an ideal layer one for a scalable future, which had not been reached at that time. I found to be incredibly important, and I've been with the project ever since. As I said, I'm on the Syscoin Foundation Board. Before we dive into Syscoin too much, I think it's really important to give an overview of where we're at market-wise, because these are some pretty key and important times. And when you understand what's right over the horizon, then you'll be able to grasp much better the importance of Syscoin. So I'll dive into that a little bit, but I'd like, of course, for Jag to be able to give an introduction as well.
Yeah, hey guys. Thanks for having us. It's pretty awesome to be on here. Some of the interesting things that mark the historical precedent of Syscoin was going back 2013, where we wanted to see how you can bring more value than just store of wealth using the blockchain. So we initially created identities and e-commerce and certificates and escrow systems on the blockchain using kind of like, I guess you can call them hardened smart contracts. So these smart contracts were just coded in to do a very specific job, and they couldn't be changed. And that was our first foray. This was before Ethereum. we realized, what works and what doesn't work, and we took a step back and we said, okay, well, what does the next 5 or 10 years look like, and how are we going to get there? Of course, the big monster in the room was zero-knowledge proofs, and how do we leverage those effectively. It didn't come till around 2018 or 19 when we realized that zero-knowledge proofs are going to be able to effectively solve this computational scale problem, which is huge, because in a blockchain, there's only two things. There's data availability, and there's computation. And the reason why all the transactions are posted on the blockchain is because the data availability is needed for all the nodes to process things in order to be able to compute that the blockchain is in the correct state. If you can offload the computation to a secondary layer using zero-knowledge proofs, not only do you not get any of the trade-offs of decentralization, you're still 100% decentralized because you're using math and not game theory, but you also get the economies of scale. We're talking about IoT, smart cities, AI levels of scale, where the more volume you have, the more scalable the system gets. And so from 2017 on, we had the horizon was, we want to do smart contracts, we want to do it right. We want to wait for Ethereum toolkits and tool stacks to mature enough so that if we use them, we can depend on them and not, have them break on us. So we waited until the right time, and it was the right time around when the zero-knowledge proof stuff was getting really, really mature enough. I spoke with both the Starkware team and the Matter Labs team to get an idea of how mature and what the paths and the roadmaps are. And I was convinced that in a short amount of time, Ethereum is going to scale up, and it's not going to make any trade-offs. Now, where does that leave Ethereum 2 and Syscoin in that picture? We'll continue that, but that's kind of where we started out and kind of what we are right now before the inevitable, cliff of jumping into layer 2s and scaling up with economies of scale and all sorts of new use cases that come about as well.
And what's really interesting, Jag, about that is we're finally starting to see this conversation hit the mainstream of Twitter almost. We got the alternative layer 1 rush this past year, which really, not a lot of people saw coming unless you were an early investor as a VC. It was all about ETH DeFi last year in 2020. Well, I guess it's almost 2 years ago now. And then now we've seen this alternative layer 1, and almost those are kind of almost in a position of, oh well, what if we can do better? And now we're seeing quite a bit of this layer 1 against the Zk-Rollup and kind of layer 2 debate. But some of the stuff that I've read up on about Syscoin actually kind of explains almost a little bit of both, kind of in the system, if you will. So I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts about that current, the current environment between the alternative layer 1s and Zk-Rollups, kind of what your thoughts are briefly, and then, how does Syscoin try to optimize to create the best environment for all?
Yeah, Bradley, before you jump in, let me just preface that with a rationalization on what Ethereum Foundation was thinking before the advent of zero-knowledge proofs in a scalable way. The literature has been that Ethereum needs to scale. CryptoKitties and all that stuff proved that something needed to be done, but we didn't know what. And so they, in order to cut down on the blockchain bloat and the ability for light clients to sync up the blocks, no one runs an archive node, for example. The only really way to have a decentralized system is to break that system apart on the layer 1, and that's where they got into sharding. And if you're doing sharding, you need to penalize nodes in case they're not operating properly. So that's where proof of stake comes, because now you have a stake and you can eliminate that stake if they're not acting honestly. So that's where POS and sharding came, was a result of a layer 1 optimization problem before the creation of ZKPs. If you even go back to Vitalik's 2020 quotes, it was more about, optimistic rollups are here now. We still will do proof of stake. We'll still do sharding, and whatever gains the optimistic rollups gives us, we'll multiply that by 10 because our layer 1 is more secure. So that rationalizing happened, from 2016 on, and that's where the alternate layer 1s came to be. So people are like, no, we can already do staking and sharding in a better way. So let us introduce a new layer 1 that could beat Ethereum at its own game. competition to Ethereum. But what's happened since then is now the creation of layer 2s, solving this thing properly. It's hard for these layer 1s to really grasp that they have been beaten at the scalability game because it's not at the layer 1. So what's going to happen is layer 2s are going to start to form on these other alternate layer 1 blockchains. And then the market's left to decide which proof of stake sharding system with layer 2s is best. And where we are a little bit different is, instead of us thinking, we need to optimize the heck out of layer 1, we've instead stood back and said, no, Bitcoin is the gold standard of security, so let's stick with layer 1 being very secure, and we'll scale with layer 2 without doing all this sharding proof of stake nonsense, which is adding tons of risk. I'll let Bradley step in.
Yeah, sure. So
Yeah,
with scaling,
Bradley,
I was just going to say, with scaling having been an issue for so long, I mean, on the value transfer side as well as, of course, the computation side with Ethereum, I think there's still quite a bit of people that are sort of missing what's really about to unfold here with a legitimate layer 2 for smart contracts emerging, in the form of Zk-Rollups. We had optimistic rollups as well, which was sort of like gamification and security assumptions based. But Zk-Rollups really, I think, are the way. So it's an interesting situation where you have so many of these alternative smart chains with proof of stake models that will essentially find themselves competing with Ethereum, which is proof of stake and has Zk-Rollups and has a very resilient and robust network, right? So I don't know that a lot of them will really have a differentiating point, maybe other than the fact that they sort of have a sort of a cult following, right? Like every chain kind of has a cult following. But for the most part, applications on an EVM are compatible with any other EVM, right? So I think in most cases, projects in the long run will end up choosing, between Ethereum or something like Syscoin that offers that gold standard Nakamoto consensus proof of work, that's merge mined and everything like that. That's incredibly dependable as far as security and has all of the scaling benefits that you would find on Ethereum as well. So yeah, I mean, it's a big macro trend that is emerging, and it's really going to steer and change the surface of the market in a lot of ways. We're going to see a lot of new use cases emerge with scale, which is something that Jag points out quite frequently. I forget the name of the doctor who pointed out that when you have an increase of scale, when that your use cases tend to multiply, right? And when you combine that, further with things like metaverse beginning to gain popularity now, which is essentially like a parallel world that has its own physics, right? And economics is essentially an abstraction of physics. When you factor all that in, and then you begin to realize that metaverse will essentially remove the blinders from people's eyes, and insofar as how they see value, and they'll be thinking outside of the box. So, just I would say the future is really going to be a hotbed of innovation as far as decentralized tech in ways that we haven't seen yet. And so many of centralized services, I would say, or user experiences normally only associated with centralized infrastructure. Those experiences will be possible now, and using decentralized infrastructure, and projects and businesses, enterprises will have the ability to maintain their business models or even enhance their business models while decentralizing, because of some of the benefits that Zk-Rollups provide. It's really such a vast topic. It's so game changing, not just for technology but for the crypto market. Just very exciting times coming.
Yeah, and for everyone who's listening, to unpack the benefits of Zk-Rollups, which we've touched on in the podcast, we know that there's two main benefits over and above optimistic rollups. One being the finality. Each transaction has its own proof, so it's proven validity even before it's posted to the Ethereum blockchain. So there's no 7-day withdrawal time. And the other benefit of ZK in excess of these other layer 2 solutions is that it becomes faster and more efficient. I guess the word that Jag used was computationally scalable. It becomes more scalable as there's more volume. And that's because as there's more transactions, there's more roots on this Merkle tree, so that there's more efficient computation as the chain scales. And I want to now dive a little bit deeper into layer 2, specifically Zk-Rollups, and how Syscoin is leveraging Bitcoin's security model and how that offers a competitive advantage over some of these other layer 2s.
Yeah, so the way that I like to explain it to people... go ahead, Jag. We're both eager to talk.
Oh, I was just going to say that the optimistic rollups, they may just as be scalable as a ZK rollup, but in a ZK rollup, you have the option of storing the data off chain, because again, in an optimistic rollup, you have to take account of a challenge. In a challenge, when someone says, "Oh, that's not the state that the blockchain should be in. Let me post the data that involves the Merkle root and all the transactions." And then the smart contract rebuilds the state and sees who's right and who's wrong. Now that is different than a validity proof, which guarantees that the system is correct, rather than relying on someone else to say, "Oh, that's wrong, I need to do something about that." So if there's no one watching that system, it's hopelessly insecure. However, it's just as scalable, because the data going on the chain is almost the same as a ZK rollup. However, in the context of a off-chain rollup, where some businesses may prefer to keep the data off-chain to increase scalability another 10 or 50x, that option doesn't exist in optimistic rollup, because the data has to be on-chain for it to be proven valid. The last concept that actually no one is really talking about is privacy preservation. In the current iterations of optimistic rollups, you do not have the ability to do privacy, because a smart contract needs to be able to see all the transactions. In a ZK rollup, with some of the stuff happening, especially around the ZK EVM, where you'll have direct EVM provability on the opcode basis, you'll be able to do client-side validity of a transaction, meaning I go to MetaMask and I sign a transaction and I actually validate in a proof that my transaction is valid, and I send it to somebody else in a proof. They don't see what the transaction is, who's involved, what it is, what the amount is. All they do is they roll that up. They roll all of the proofs into an outer proof and store that on the blockchain. And so there's no privacy given up in any of the transactional model. Whereas in optimistic, you can combine these concepts, maybe have a ZK plus optimistic for privacy preservation, but in the current iteration, optimistic rollups don't do that. So I just wanted to highlight that. And then there actually is a third type of blockchain, and that is a succinct blockchain. Mir and Mina protocol are examples. And those end up boiling down, if you really refactor it enough, those end up boiling down to be a single rollup. It really is just a single rollup, because all of the transactionality happens on one layer. And therefore, I would call it a monolithic design, because everything happens on one layer. Whereas in Ethereum and Syscoin, you'll have the one layer, but all of the transactionality will be off on secondary layers. It's not to say that Mir and Mina can't do that, but the way it's designed is that everything is posted and the proofs are posted on the first layer. And so all of the data will have to be posted on that layer as well.
Yeah, and just real briefly, not too much of a digression, but we haven't touched on the difference between a monolithic blockchain and what you're pointing to as the other type as a modular blockchain. And I believe Syscoin fits into this more modular category. If you could just briefly describe kind of the difference between a monolithic blockchain and a modular one.
I can give examples like Solana, Avalanche, ADA, Tron, BSC. These are monolithic designs. Even Ethereum 1 is a monolithic design as it is today. However, the roadmap has adjusted since last year to be a modular design. Rollup centric roadmap is what they called it. Syscoin is designed from ground up to be a modular design because we have slow block times and finality after 15 seconds of a block, and we have selfish mining. We solve that, and we're proof of work, and so a little bit slower on layer one, more thought of as like a court system, stable, secure. You got the Lindy effect of Bitcoin, and everything happens on layer two. And what that means is you can have all your transactionality not being on that one layer. They're all going to be on separate layers. Like IBM can run one, Intel, Microsoft can run one. They can all be completely separate and not have to intermix any of the accounts. And therefore, they'll achieve true parallelization, right? Like if you have two different rollups running, those accounts are not connected. The systems don't need to touch each other. Therefore, they can operate independently. And therefore, the scalability is multiplied by two, instead of, in some systems you'll have to have shared accounts, and then you have to synchronize them, and you're making synchronization assumptions, stuff starts to break. Those were some of the innovations that Solana was bringing to the table, is doing optimization and parallelization and that kind of thing. But at scale, those become more complex. And so if you keep them separate, the only real way to keep them separate is through math, right? Not cryptographic assumptions. Because as soon as you make these assumptions, you know that the black swan event is always going to happen at some point. In the case of Zk-Rollups, the black swan event is a mathematical digression or some sort of quantum breakthrough or something like that, which is a much stronger assumption on the system. It's a weaker cryptographic assumption. It's probably more safe than assuming that there's going to be no black swan event of people colluding or something like that.
Right. Yeah, the way that you kind of put it, it makes it pretty easy to understand, as the monolithic blockchains are kind of all in one, right? They have the availability of the data layer and the execution layer basically in one chain. And effectively the modular ones, where ETH is heading with ETH 2.0, Rollups, and Syscoin, as an example, are effectively, they separate the availability and data layer and the execution layer to basically offer max scale. So that's kind of the downside to these, alternative layer ones. While users are really happy to use them now, including, me and Rob, high yields, quick transactions, cheap fees. It's been great. But you start to see the downfalls when compared to these kind of, higher level, more scalable modular blockchains. And it's kind of interesting to see y'all's opinion in developing the vision of Syscoin being OGs, if you will, in the space. Zcash, Zuko, ZK Snarks, Bitcoin, of course, being in crypto in 2013, 2014, 2015, you kind of keep this level of Bitcoin is gold, if you will. Zcash is like, the good privacy coin, right? Of course, there's others. So it's kind of interesting to see how that has shaped y'all's vision compared to some of these earlier builders, some of these newer builders who, perhaps didn't quite get, let's say, baptized, if you will. So I'm curious to kind of hear more about the development of y'all's security model, both sides, the ZK Rollups and the Bitcoin model, and why you guys think it's the best for scaling blockchains.
Yeah, so, there's the Lindy effect theory, which is that essentially the longer that a technology has been around and has been relevant and used, then sort of the longer that you can project that it will be relevant into the future. And we see that with Bitcoin, right? And we see that with Ethereum as well, both being first movers in their respective areas. Bitcoin with decentralized secure settlement, Ethereum with decentralized computation. And so, we've been a Bitcoin merge mined blockchain for a while. And we always saw the value in that. Merge mining was an idea of Satoshi himself, that he put forth on the Bitcoin talk forums years ago when he was talking with the guys at BitDNS. You can go back and and sort of look through that. But I think it's going to become a lot more relevant into the future, and I'm excited about that. I think merge mining is just as prophetic in its importance as Satoshi's idea for the UTXO model and change addresses, right? Because now that we see advancements in quantum computing, and people tend to bring up this question all the time about blockchains, are they quantum resistant? And I think a lot of that's overblown in many cases, but in particular with Bitcoin, because that change address scheme is there, it is like inherently quantum resistant already, and it's almost like Satoshi saw that ahead of time, right? I think the same holds true with merge mining, particularly later on in Bitcoin's life, once it really becomes mature and it reaches towards that, hitting that max supply. That will be a way that Bitcoin will continue to function. But as far as Syscoin goes, Syscoin is essentially a system of systems, which is modular in nature. And also, as far as our base layer, that's also a system of systems, where essentially you've got the large sphere, which is Syscoin, and within that you have two smaller spheres. One is the Bitcoin model, the other is the Ethereum model for computation. And we leave both of those models intact, right? We don't want to wreck the Lindy effect. We want to maintain that, and where we can, with minimal overhead, we will tweak certain things. Like we have the MEV resistance from multi-quorum finality on the Bitcoin side. That secures and protects against people bidding to take other people's value, in an MEV attack, or 51% attacks and things like that. So we have we can establish that finality because of some unique characteristics of our network, in particular the fact that we have incentivized full nodes, and that the quantity of those full nodes at any given time is fairly steady and predictable, because we have implemented a seniority benefit model for people who want to operate full nodes. So right now we have like 2,500 incentivized full nodes, an untold number of just regular full nodes that aren't incentivized. But we know we have about 2,500 incentivized full nodes that have to run a base layer. They have to. They have to run a base. They have to provide a base amount of resources. Fulfill a resource requirement. So we have a rough idea, sort of what we can expect out of our network, how we can leverage it, and we can depend upon those incentivized full nodes for some things like quorums, right? So a quorum is formed every 12 hours. It's randomly. It's a random selection of 400 incentivized full nodes, and every single block, which we have a 2.5 minute block time. About 15 seconds after every block, the quorum is reached and the chain lock is applied. So if there aren't 400 incentivized full nodes, which we don't necessarily foresee that happening, because we have a pretty dependable network. But essentially, what our security will do is roll back to the Bitcoin way of doing things. There wouldn't be a chain lock in that case if 400 nodes couldn't agree on the chain lock. And instead of breaking the system, if that were to happen, it simply just reverts back to standard Bitcoin style consensus. So yeah, that provides a lot of benefits. It secures DeFi, and essentially, going back to the model that we have, where we have these two models, this model for computation with Ethereum, this model for security with Bitcoin, inside of the bigger Syscoin model. We interconnect those through protocol adaptation in such a way to where our computation model that we call NEVM is able to inherit the security of the Bitcoin model through merge mining. So we leave those models intact, right? We don't change them in any way, because we want to maintain those tried and true characteristics, but we do enhance upon them without creating new assumptions, right? So that's effectively sort of a kind of a visual of how Syscoin works.
Yeah, it's important to note that in a DeFi system, you need to start to think about finality a little bit because of the so-called auctions that you can actually roll back the blockchain in the state if there's enough value to arbitrage, for example. So if you're not thinking about finality, the DeFi of your on your platform may actually cease to exist or become less valuable. And so Ethereum is planning for finality on their Layer 1 blockchain. Mostly the data is going to be the thing that's going to be secured on Ethereum, but that it'll take about 10 minutes. And the reason it takes 10 minutes is because they got to be really, really sure. Because if they're not really sure on Ethereum, it's proof of stake and the system will break. It will require a fork. There's no fallback. There's no proof of work fallback or longest chain rule or Bitcoin consensus or anything like that. In our system, we decided to flip it on its head and say we don't want to break if we can't achieve finality, but we will, in the best case scenario, have finality, and most likely 99.99% of the time, we will achieve finality, right? In those cases, no MEV attacks are possible, no selfish mining is possible. You can't 51% attack the network. However, our finality is also achieved through 15 seconds or less because we're not going to break if the system can't achieve finality. If you can't achieve finality, it simply falls back to the Bitcoin model. So it's a little bit more, a little bit of nuance there on how we achieve that characteristic. But in the proof of stake model, it's much harder. Therefore, it has to be hardened to a point where it never can happen. And we know black swans happen. So the system is designed to kind of fail if it's left for 100 years. Whereas in a system that falls back to Bitcoin, we know that system is probably likely to not be untouched and still survive for a long period of time.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think Bradley kind of succinctly stated the competitive advantage that Syscoin offers as this system of systems. It's able to integrate Bitcoin's security model with Ethereum's computational model, and that's what Syscoin is calling NEVM. And I'm curious, I guess, the extent of that interoperability. Does Syscoin provide for smart contracts and DeFi on Bitcoin, like native Bitcoin, in addition to being interoperable with, say, MetaMask and some of the other EVM chains? Like, what is the extent of that interoperability?
Well, the Bitcoin work is borrowed, and so there's different ways to try to do this. You can use actual Bitcoin through merge mining and then also plugging into the consensus rules of Bitcoin. However, if you do that, then you're considering Bitcoin utility in your system, and also you have to worry about onboarding and offboarding costs and times, right? Because we know the block times are super slow and expensive to use, and Bitcoin is not really utility, it's more a store of value. So do people really want to use it for gas? So you're conflating concerns in that sort of system. What we thought about was Bitcoin is the value of Bitcoin is in its work. It's not in the policy, right? The policy is just a UTXO model, and you can't double spend. That's all the policy is, right? We don't really care about that. We have our own policies, which follows almost exactly the same rules, but we're not worried. Like our tokenomics are geared towards being a utility and a gas rather than more of a store of wealth, if that makes sense. Because we have an EIP 1559 model, if you know what that is, it's a static inflation that gauges through more utility purpose. If more people are using it, more coins are burned. If not, then it's inflationary. So thinking of it with that lens, it makes more sense to just borrow the work, but not rely on the consensus of Bitcoin and apply our own rules inside. Instead of like the risk or stacks blockchain trying to directly plug it into Bitcoin by borrowing the consensus and the work. We actually don't care about the consensus. We only care about the work.
Okay. And Bradley touched on this briefly, but maybe we can unpack it a bit more. By borrowing the work on the Bitcoin network, is there any concern of a lack of incentive for these validators?
Yeah, it's a good thing that you brought that up, because as Bitcoin subsidy starts to narrow down, the questions start to arise, like what happens when the subsidy goes to near zero? will the fees be enough to sustain such a large network, and will difficulty start to drop? Because as you know, there's a correlation with price and difficulty, right? If it doesn't achieve mass effect in the consumer market, like through maybe embedded devices and IoT devices, the difficulty is going to be really hard to keep going up, right? Because the boards aren't getting any smaller now, they're not getting any more efficient, and it just requires more and more people to buy into it. Now, what happens if the subsidy is the only thing that people are relying on? Then the Bitcoin price has to be exponentially rising to account for enough for more and more people to join and the difficulty to go up. Otherwise, it starts to drop again. In our case, we actually have a static subsidy that's applied up to the miners on the NEVM. So just like Ethereum is applying a static subsidy, it doesn't go down, it doesn't go up, it's a static amount throughout EIP 1559. We modeled that out to be starting around 1% inflation per year right now. It kind of ties into the population growth, right? Because as more and more people are coming to the earth, they need a system that's going to secure them financially over time. That's about 1% of growth right now, but it'll be dropping over time. And so we kind of modeled it out in that regard.
Super interesting, the correlation between the population of the world over time and on-chain users and blocks and mining and difficulties. It's something that you wouldn't even have to think about, 8 years ago, and now the Lindy of Bitcoin, as we've stated, is here. It's not going anywhere, and now we're starting to really put some crazy real world use cases to it. Yeah, Jag, I love the Canadian accent on the oot, man. I just had all my Canadian ancestors and cousins down, and the whole house was saying "eh" all week. So, but yeah, no, a lot of us DeFi Slate guys, community chicks, dudes, older dudes, younger women, whatever it is, we like to get in the trenches, and get our hands dirty with some yield farming, some NFTs, some of the more degen stuff. So I think Bradley might have a little smile on his face here as well. Would love to kind of hear about the upcoming app layer on the Syscoin network, what users can expect, kind of some of the stuff that Rob touched on, the interoperability as far as getting funds there. Kind of what's on the agenda for creating a community of users.
Yeah, so
Brad?
our ecosystem is growing. We've got currently 3 DEXs looking to launch on Syscoin and EVM. Pegasus really is the first DEX that came along. That's managed now. It has Sys in the name, so people kind of assume that maybe that's managed by the Syscoin team or something, but it's not. It's an independent team that we have done work with in the past, but it's their project, and they're aiming to launch on just on the NEVM layer 1, right, and then extend that into Rollups once those are available. We also have Mute, which you're probably familiar with Mute. It's a privacy-oriented DeFi suite. And an AMM, and they're very much oriented to Zk-Rollups and have been developing specifically, for that for a while now. We happened to interact with them quite a bit before they were called Mute, and Jag gave them a lot of consultation on essentially how to go forward. He recommended Zk-Rollups to them as the avenue for them to fulfill what they were really looking to do, which is to have a privacy-oriented DeFi suite. And there's another one that I won't mention quite yet. We also have partnered with the project currently known as AnySwap, which I think they're rebranding to Multichain. And they're essentially a cross-chain bridge that uses sort of an optimistic approach, which works for now. But that will be a great way to get value from other chains into our ecosystem as well. We've got an AI Oracle project that's very interested in launching as well, and just a number of others. I mean, they keep coming. I personally, have a little bit of a challenge in like trying to keep track of them all, but we do have a burgeoning ecosystem. Its growth is driven by TVL incentives and by really our willingness, on Syscoin Foundation to consult and communicate with these projects and ensure that they have the degree of support that we can provide to help them out, to onboard. And it's some of the challenges that we face being a young and burgeoning ecosystem, or is sort of like the chicken and egg problem, where you'll talk to a bigger project and they'll say, well, what's the TVL on your platform? How many users do you have? And we're like, well, we're kind of, this ecosystem is being kickstarted right now. So, but the great thing about our design and what we have to offer when we talk to projects is that, the idea of launching on any VM really becomes a strategic move, right? So even though we're just sort of like building our ecosystem and fostering it kind of at its beginnings, it's going very well. And we're getting a lot of ears and a lot of attention from projects, and a lot of people do see the strategic value in what we have to offer, and they are interested in sort of coming together and and building our ecosystem with us, which is you don't really have an ecosystem if you're building it all yourself, right? That doesn't exactly make the definition. So
yeah, we got two DAOs. We got about 3 or 4 bridges that want to link into layer 1 and layer 2. We got 3 of the DEXs, and there's other staking, DeFi, farming sort of things. We're partnered with Zk-Rollups project from Whiteblock. Which one was that again? It's on Polygon right now, but yeah, it's like a DeFi aggregating system, or DeFi aggregating AMM system. They'll be looking to launch on most likely layer 2. Most of our value is going to be on layer 2, right? Layer 1, you do need the indexing, the AMM, the bridging to get in, right? And then you're going to be like, okay, well, let me move into layer 2 and let me try to plug in to layer 2 to get the scalability and efficiency gains. So when we talk to projects, it's more about, yes, we can launch you on layer 1 today, but it's not as cool as what we want to be doing and putting you on layer 2. And to that regard, we are talking to the Matter guys and the Starkware guys, trying to get them to plug in to Sys. We will have avenues of doing our own as well, researching the ZK-EVM stuff. I'm not sure if you guys heard of that, but really it's just like by next year, you'll be able to formally prove the Ethereum blockchain using a validity proof, as it is, without having to go into any language or anything like that. Actually taking the EVM and running a transaction and creating a validity proof of that transaction using the existing EVM spec, which is huge because that opens up interoperability. It opens up, almost trustless, decentralized, free light client services. Think about it like a decentralizer, trustless Infura, right? Because Infura is very trustful right now. But think about making that trustless, because you just get a validity proof that your blockchain is valid and you can trust it, and then you can sync up to the blockchain within a couple seconds. So having really, really interesting light client avenues, which is another reason why ETH Foundation added sharding and staking, was because of light clients. But now with Zk-EVM, you're going to solve that. You're going to solve interoperability, and you're going to solve doing validity proofs to further scale the layer 1. Where Ethereum is going to go is they're going to end up just having their blockchain just be a Zk-EVM, recursively proven. If you want to prove that at any given time your blockchain is valid, you just get the EVM proof, and you can validate that within a few milliseconds. And you don't need to download the rest of the blocks. You can download just the tip and know that it's valid. That's what ZK-EVM will unlock, and that's where they're going to go with that. Once, maybe in a couple of years when they add that, we'll be right there as well.
Yeah, Jag, that's really interesting, kind of as you describe Zk-EVM and how it opens up the trustless nature of some of the more inner core components of the internet. Web3 has kind of taken on like this meme value, at least recently, where people are equating cryptocurrency to Web3 as like almost a marketing tactic. But as you describe the benefits that it transcends into with Zk-EVM and how that opens up trustless Infura, kind of coupling that with the evolution of ENS, we're starting to see Web3 take shape more so than just the transfer of wealth across the internet as far as cryptocurrencies.
Yeah, the elephant in the room with Web3 right now, the big problem with it, and this is coming from someone that worked on the Polygon ecosystem, and they're advising us on direction with DeFi and Web3, is the spam and the denial of service attacks on those RPC endpoints. You're seeing this with BSC today, with Polygon, with Phantom, a lot of these systems, even though they're very well distributed, and they maybe got 100 endpoints, very easy to attack, right? Because you could just spam it and it doesn't know or care where the source is coming from. If they start rate limiting you, then they're going to start rate limiting a good user as well, and it's going to affect the experience. So how do you solve that? Well, if you have an Infura type service, you can definitely solve it, where you have to log in, get an API key, and then get rate limited if you use it too much. But it becomes a trusted service, right? You're trusting Infura as a company, and they'll know your data, they'll know your throughput. They can also stop you from transacting. However, if you couple that with a validity proof, you can actually transfer that into a trustless service. So getting that response back, you don't need to trust that Infura is telling a lie or not. And if Infura is not responding to you, there'll be a whole bunch of other services doing the same thing, because it's so cheap and easy to do. So that will be the really interesting thing, that to solve the denial of service and the spam attacks with Web3, which is plaguing most of the projects right now.
Yeah, that was hitting me today on Chronos chain, crypto.com chain. Couldn't get anything to load, had to reset the RPCs, still wouldn't work, DEXs wouldn't load balances, transactions wouldn't go through. It's just, you go on chain list and you try to get them going again. And yeah, it's interesting that's, I didn't realize that it was easy to kind of cause that. It hasn't really happened too much to me before, but definitely, ironically today. As we kind of wrap up here, Brad and Jack, thanks guys for coming on. Would love to kind of ask you guys two quick things. First is, what is each of your bold predictions for 2022 in crypto? I'll have Jag go first.
I think we're in an uber bull phase technically, like on the technological roadmap. Where Professor Dan Bonet was saying, every time you scale up 10%, you get 5 or 2 new, or untold number of use cases that you never thought would have been possible. And our industry is largely driven by zero barrier of entry to create new use cases, because every time you get a new use case, you get new money, you get new interest, you get velocity flowing, and therefore appreciating DeFi TVLs, right? Having the scalability aspect solved to give us 50 to 100x increase of scale without actually affecting decentralization. We're seeing actual economies of scale where the number of users start pouring in, the actual costs start to go down, which is amazing because that never has been possible before. That will usher in a whole slew of new use cases we never will be able to comprehend. A year from now, we'll look back and say, I never knew that would be possible. So that means to me that we are in a phase of discovery of tech and use cases, much like maybe Bitcoin 2014-15, where we're discovering what it really is, and the enterprise market start to jump in, and institutional start to jump in. It's the great store of value. It's the bottom of Exeter's pyramid. It's the Gresham's law of money being applied. That is going to transfer into the real DeFi, the real cool use cases, the smart cities and AI concepts start to come into play, and the metaverse, alternate reality start to come into play, and they all start to touch each other. and open up a whole slew of new use cases that maybe gaming related or not, that we may not have known would have been possible. So that's what's exciting. Like, I don't even care about what the charts are doing right now, because I know that it's just so promising on the technical side, and you're hearing it from someone that's in this stuff every day, that it's kind of irrelevant on what people are doing with the charts and buying and selling or whatever.
Let's go! Brad, what's your bold prediction of 2022?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't want to wax too dark, because there's such a bright and amazing future ahead for us with the direction that tech is going now. And that's going to have some very positive and great things kind of ripple out into the market as well. But I do want to say that, you know, a lot of layer ones that, you know, have had a monolithic approach. My prediction is, you know, unless they come up with some way to, you know, some very important differentiation between them and Ethereum 2.0 that really has value, which I see, you know, they're kind of in a rock and hard place right now, some of them. I don't think that they're going to maintain the level of, you know, market presence that they have today. Just my prediction, and I don't want to throw shade on them on those projects. I think they have value, and I think the vast majority of the developers are good. I see, you know, in all likelihood, a lot of them, you know, becoming rollups, unless they come up with, you know, some new idea and recognize some need that you know, maybe other people aren't picking up on. I think the future is modular blockchains, and you know, another prediction that I have, and I don't know that will happen in 2022. Maybe over the course of the next few years. You know, it all depends on just, you know, how enterprises handle this and how aggressive they choose to be. But, you know, I do see a future where regulated securities will actually be able to use decentralized infrastructure. They'll be able to utilize the blockchain in a way that does not involve custodianship over other people's funds. They'll be able to comply with regulations or enforce whatever business rules that they need to make sure that they're doing business the way that they're supposed to. I think that's going to be an absolutely huge market in the future, and it's just a matter of time until that happens, because the technology, the fundamental technology that's needed to provide that is actually now here. There have been attempts to accomplish that over the past several years, particularly I think like in 2018 there was a lot of that going on, you know, in more like the eastern side of the world, where they were trying to like have like compliant blockchains or something, but the paths that they chose to try to pursue that really weren't right. It wasn't really the right and proper design. But there is a right and proper design for that. Blockchain Foundry, which happens to have you know, a presence on the Syscoin Foundation Board. They're a publicly traded company, you know, created by the original founders of Syscoin. They have some solutions specifically for that problem that are really very elegant and are able to tie into Syscoin for those sort of enterprises that need that kind of sort of permissioned layer. I know it sounds kind of dirty to a crypto anarchist like myself, but regulations exist. They'll probably exist in the future. And there are solutions for that now that are actually really, really elegant when you sit down with someone and actually explain how it works. So yeah, so I see securities being able to leverage open, public, decentralized blockchains in the future.
Yeah, I would touch on the advent of zero-knowledge proofs is going to be as greater than the blockchain itself, and the connection between the blockchain and zero-knowledge proofs creates a holy grail system. So just you know, basically that the power of the tech, like Bradley was saying, he doesn't think that unless they come up with world-changing tech that's going to enable monolithic chains to scale, zero-knowledge proofs are big or bigger than the invention of blockchain itself, because they don't need to be used with the blockchain. They could be completely separate. but with the blockchain to become really, really useful.
Amazing, guys. Amazing. Thank you so much for coming on, talking about everything that is coming in 2022, DeFi, what's coming for Syscoin, all sorts of rollups, scaling, really, really forward-looking conversation. And, you know, if you didn't come out of this excited to keep building next year, then I don't know what you just listened to, but it wasn't this podcast. So thank you guys for coming on.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's great to come on. Maybe we can do it again in the future sometime soon.
Yeah, that'd be great. And Brad, to your regulation point, I think we're starting to see a lot of acceptance kind of all across the world, U.S. and abroad. And it's super exciting to see all of these applications. Jag, as you mentioned, kind of more scalability just paves the way for more use cases. And it's almost unpredictable what will happen, but it is almost certainly positive. So looking forward to doing it again in the future. And the bright future for Syscoin is kind of paving the way, illuminating the way for a lot of these new applications. Thanks for coming on, and would love to do it again.
Yeah, thanks guys. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and hopefully we can connect again once we have our layer 2s up operational, and we can connect again on number of users and use cases and dApps that are jumping on board.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks again.